Got it.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Empowerment to Unlock the Justice System with Keep Six. My name is Maya. I will be helping guide this interview, and I'd like to introduce everyone to Matthew here. If you'd like to give yourself a little introduction.
Hi, everybody. My name is Matthew Smith. I'm from Nova Scotia originally. Um, Pretty much lived there, grew up there, spent a majority of my life in the East Coast. Um, I guess I can just give a little background on myself. I grew up in a pretty religious family. I had your typical childhood sports, school. I had a lot of church in my young years. That was a big part of my family dynamic. And yeah, I just had a typical childhood until I would say I was about 14 or 15. I would say 14 is when I really start to have, for different reasons, whether they be emotional, mental, struggling with the fact that although I lived in my grandparents' home, I was raised by a single mother who actually, she gave birth to me very young. I, of course, was struggling with the fact that I didn't have, I had my grandfather in my life who was like an integral part of my upbringing, but like a father figure, which I don't think is necessarily the same thing. I mean, every kid, especially little boy, wants to have who they know to be their father in their life. So I struggle with that at a young age, struggle with anger management, and kind of going along with, while I was still going to church, I was starting to kind of excel in sports, football in particular. I was also like outside of school and definitely outside of the sight of my family. I was starting to get into a little trouble. It started with just, small things like theft, and I graduated to breaking and entering. And then from there, the slippery slope pretty much started. I started to take a pretty downward spiral, not right away, but gradually. Kids don't make, teenagers don't usually make good informed decisions as it is. So when a teenager's in a lifestyle where the risks are a lot more present, that good decision making is just not, it's just not a good combination. So I was in and out of juvenile detention a couple of times through like my mid-teens. And again, I was still at the same time, while I was getting into trouble, like I was starting to carry guns, starting to kind of be involved in street conflicts and that kind of stuff. I was also doing very well in football, and a lot of, especially family and close friends in my life usually saw, like they knew I had been in trouble a few times, but I don't think they were aware that it was to the extent that it was. So I would say probably my grade 12 year, on one hand, I was, working to get, scholarships, tried to figure out what university I wanted to go to. I had lots of offers. And then outside of school, I was pretty much a full blown, I guess, quote unquote gangster at this point. I mean, I was carrying guns, living a fast life. And, they say you can't serve two gods. So unfortunately, the decisions I was making outside of my family and outside of school and church really came to backfire on me. And then I believe I was supposed to turn 19 when I had my really first serious charge, which was it was a drive-by shooting in Halifax that I was involved in. which I spent about 2 years in provincial custody because of that offense. I was released, and I tried to, get back into football. I still had some coaches and some people that knew me in that aspect that were still willing to help. A lot of people started to distance themselves, of course, because of the reputation I had created for myself. So after I was released from that 2 years, um, I was in 2011. I was arrested for another firearms related offense, a break and enter, and which was basically connected to some conflicts I was having in the community, in the streets, and that led me to receiving a 12-year sentence. A 12-year sentence which I just completed this year, actually. So my adulthood pretty much came about in prison. 3 of that 12 years was spent in a provincial facility, basically the facilities that they hold you in when you're still going to court waiting to be sentenced. And then the remainder of that sentence I spent in various federal institutions across the country, from Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. And yeah, that's kind of, well, not necessarily what brings me here today, but not only did I come to be an adult in the federal system, I also missed out on a lot of things that your average 20-year-old or 25-year-old gets to do. And so I'm obviously skipping over a lot of things when I say this, but it got to a point where I had to make a decision where I was either going to continue down that path and give the remainder of my life to the prison system or potentially be killed, or I was going to have to make some changes so I can enjoy the years that I do have left. And not necessarily thankful that I received a sentence so young, but I'm still fairly young, so it was kind of a blessing in disguise that this didn't happen when I was 27 or 28, as opposed to being 19 and being released in my early 30s when I was 31. I think it's a lot. It's a little bit more favorable than being released when I'm 40 or 45. So I had to look at it. As hard as it was, I had to try and be positive, because majority of the people that I came across, like inmates that I came across that spent 12 years on the inside, majority of them don't get out. They don't live to see the outside ever again. So it's rare for someone to do that amount of time and then come home to be, have an opportunity to make a life for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really interested to see where, this effort goes that Maya and I are putting forward. And so I think it's kind of my obligation in a way to use my story and my journey, my bad decisions, my mistakes, to hopefully even prevent one young man or one young woman from making the same mistakes, because they are avoidable. And I had windows throughout my life where, had things been a little different, I know my journey would have been different. So I definitely think, all hope is never lost as long as you're awake and breathing. Mm-hmm. All hope is never lost. So, I wanted to hopefully take this opportunity and just use the little bit of the story I do have, and hopefully use it for some good.
Yes, and that's exactly what we're here to do. And I really like what you said about all hope is not lost, no matter where you are. no matter where you are in your life or your journey, as long as you're alive, there's still hope for a better tomorrow or even a better week ahead.
For
So
sure.
thank you for sharing your kind of like history background. Matthew does have a lot of things that have happened in the system that again brings him here today, and we do want to share and shed some light on. I do want to start when we talked before this about the very beginning of your sentencing in I believe then a federal institution, and just as a young man, like what, you were 21?
I think I was 22, I believe.
22.
Yeah.
As a young man, who just got some pretty devastating news, or maybe not the best, you're not feeling too hopeful already. As a young man kind of going into, the federal institution. And if you want to just share what those first, I have the number written down somewhere on my screen, but like 200 something days were like for you, because I think really your story is very powerful, and a lot of things have happened that, a lot of other people don't come out with such a positive attitude. And especially just the 12 years that you were originally given, there were a lot of things that happened that I think a lot of other people may have reacted differently, and maybe people can also take away your positivity and really like drive to stay on one path through everything that happened given the circumstances. So if you want to just share about your first basically we'll say your first 200 days.
Sure. Yeah, so when I spent about a little over 3 years in like pre-trial or provincial custody at this point. I'd never been to a federal institution before, but when I arrived, it was at an institution called Spring Hill Institutions in Spring Hill, Nova Scotia. And when I arrived at the institution, I was greeted by the warden and what they call their intelligence officers at the institution. And basically, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but they basically said to me in a nutshell that that my reputation had preceded me, and they had been hearing my name for years. They didn't really specify what they had been hearing. And I didn't really know any better. This was my first experience in the federal system, which is night and day in comparison to the provincial system. So for all I knew, this was kind of normal procedure. Well, I thought that until they told me that basically they felt my presence within the institution led them to believe that, the security of the facility, the security of other inmates, security of staff would be in jeopardy because of my potential influence within the population. So at the time, I had just received a 12-year sentence. And to me at that time, that was like the end of the world. They might as well have said 100 years. So when they're telling me this, it's just kind of like, I was kind of in survival mode. Like, I definitely didn't have anything good going on in my mind and my spirit at this time. So when they're telling me this, it's just kind of like, but now after having some experience in that system, I realized how unjustified what they did was, because I was a young man coming into a prison where there's guys who have been there for 30, 40 years. And for me now, knowing what prison's like, to think that they legitimately thought a kid at that age would have any influence over basically grown men.
You didn't know any better though.
Exactly. At the time, I didn't know any better. So
yeah.
They told me that I was going to be placed in segregation, what they call administrative segregation, which is what they call non-disciplinary segregation. So they make it clear it's not related to your behavior. And they have a few different, what they call codes that they can put you in administrative segregation was. And mine was, my presence was placing the security of the institution in jeopardy. So they put me in segregation in Spring Hill, which is a medium security facility. And in the federal system, there's minimum security, which is the most relaxed, is the lowest. There's medium security, which this institution was. There's maximum security, and then there's what they call the SHU or supermax. And anybody who is beginning a federal sentence is supposed to spend 90 to 100 days in what they call a reception center, and all reception centers are in medium security. So the simple fact that I wasn't going there and I was going to segregation was obviously a red flag. And after a day in segregation at Spring Hill Institution, what prisoners know as the goon squad. So basically it's like in like an emergency response team within the prison. They have shields, they have like a Darth Vader mask. They woke me up like 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning the next day and told me that I was being emergency transferred to Atlantic Institution, which is a maximum security in Renouf. And it wasn't even 20 minutes later, I was handcuffed, shackled, I had chains around my waist. I was in the back of their transfer van and I was on my way to New Brunswick. And this is all under the guise that my presence was jeopardizing the facility. So once I arrived to Atlantic Institution later on that day, I got the same meet and greet by the warden there, security intelligence there. And they told me that I would be placed in segregation, administrative segregation again. And I would remain there until they could facilitate a transfer to a different province, which they did 220 plus days later. So the first almost year of my sentence was spent in administrative seg. And I was already like down in the dumps. I mean, I had committed a crime, so obviously I deserved, but I mean, I wasn't looking at it like that at the time. All I could think was 12 years, I'm probably gonna die in here. So this treatment that I was getting definitely wasn't having a positive effect on, my mental health, all that. And so yeah, the next 200 plus days was spent in administrative segregation in Atlantic Institution. And anytime I was moved out of my cell, I was to be cuffed and shackled, which is what they call SMP, Special Movement Protocol. Again, this was all apparently not related to my behavior. Mm-hmm. So the effect that had on the rest of my sentence, so I was eventually transferred to a maximum security in Ontario, in Kingston, Ontario. And so aside from how it affected me personally, once I get to another institution, all they see is, oh, this guy's been in segregation for X amount of days. Like right away, you're marked. To them, the reason doesn't really matter. So that just kind of doomed the rest of my sentence, and everything was just not everything. Like I had definitely some good learning experience. There were some positives, but it definitely.
Well, it just sets a tone.
Yeah, it set things on a bad trajectory for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, we talk so much about keeping a positive attitude, and we want people, especially people serving long amount of sentences or X amount of years, want to feel rehabilitated when they come out and ready to be a better person. But then we are, seeing this happen. So it just kind of it's like when you have a really, really bad day and then one thing happens and it just sets it all over the edge and it's like, really? And
Yeah.
so for that, like,
When it rains, it pours.
exactly.
Yeah,
And, it really was pouring without any warning, which
for
is
sure.
for me, and, hearing that, it's, the worst part is what were you going to do? And what were you going to know? You weren't going to know that this is not standard, or,
Yeah,
you're young, you're like, you don't know any better than
exactly. Yeah.
it. I'm sure, like, now looking back on it now, it's like this XYZ
Uh-huh.
was a red flag. But yeah, so you're moved to, now you're in Ontario.
Yes, ma'am.
And so how is your mental health, and like, because it is men's mental health awareness month in
Of
Canada
course.
right now. And these things, and especially dealing with the justice system, takes a big toll on mental health, young and young people, uh women, men, everyone. How was in maximum security on your own, like, how was your mental health? How were your thought processes? What was keeping you going, or maybe keeping you sane in that time? What could you fill your time with?
If I had to attribute like any of my quote unquote perseverance to anything, it would be my family.
Mhm.
Um, they definitely didn't agree or support the life I had been living up until that point, but they still supported me as, their son or grandson or nephew. Um, so it was definitely my family, which I was, I'm lucky to have that support because most guys um, in those places, they don't have that. And they don't have anybody they can reach out to on the phone, nobody to come and visit them. Um, so I can't really say it was anything I did personally. I mean, I read,
Yeah.
worked out, did like the, stereotypical things you think an inmate would do,
Standard. Yeah.
but I mean, there's guys that do that stuff and still don't make it out. So
Yeah.
it was definitely, my family is a big part of that for sure,
Mhm.
because like it didn't really matter what was going on around me at the time. Anytime I got on the phone and spoke to like one of my close family members, it, um, it definitely had like always a positive effect on me. And it always kept that reminder in the back of my head that like, I have people waiting for me. I have family that I need to return to. I have a son. So if not for myself, I need to, persevere and make it through
Mhm.
because of that. But there's definitely mental health challenges for sure. But to say I've addressed them, I wouldn't be completely honest if I said that. I've kind of just, suppressed it in a way because that's what I learned to do. Like in those environments, it's, you're surrounded by wolves. So
Mhm.
guys aren't necessarily running around telling each other about their mental health struggles,
Of course. Yeah.
and if you were to look on paper or, public record, you would see that, okay, the prison offers psychologists, there's mental health support workers, there's all these things on paper, but in reality, they're not really being accessed because they're looked at as a part of like the security apparatus. So most guys in there look at the psychologist no different than they would look at their parole officer or,
Yeah.
one of the guards. So
Yeah.
again, like it's there, but so I would say mental health is probably, if not the biggest, it's definitely at the top of the list for, struggles that guys have for sure.
Yeah. Well, men here as well who aren't, maybe have never served time or never
Uh-huh.
even convicted, don't live a lifestyle like that at all.
Yeah.
Men, unfortunately, we live in a society where it's for men especially, emotions and dealing with things mentally is not exactly the strong and
Sure.
quote unquote manly thing to do. So I can imagine
So true.
in a facility with only men,
Yeah.
especially those who, you know, come from a very different lifestyle and very hard lifestyle. And I can imagine that it was not seen as something like you were not sitting in talking circles. Like,
Yeah.
So yeah, I was actually going to ask you about resources. Like, were they, I guess, obviously, to be able to trust any person in any like authoritative position is just not where you're looking to go. But, and again, we hear about a lot of rehabilitation stuff, and you know, everyone cares about mental health, and we love to put it on posters and advertisements. When it comes down to really implementing it,
Yeah.
it kind of gets lost in the we'll call it the trend. You know, it's really trendy to talk about mental health until the people that need it most need it. So those resources that you're talking about, like the psychologist, whatever, were they super accessible or just not like bad reputation? How did those kind of play out for you?
I don't know if I would say they're definitely present, but everything is like everything in there has a system, whether it's canteen, school. So it always starts with what they call a written request. Like you can't just walk up, obviously, walk through the prison when you want to go knock on some staff members' doors. So it always starts with a request that you have to write. You have to get it signed by usually 2 different staff members before it makes it to whatever the destination is. And that can be like, you know, a struggle. And it sounds simple, but I mean, something as simple as reading and writing, a lot of guys struggle with just that. So asking them to fill out a request detailing why they want to see a psychologist is like
not ideal, not happening. Like
exactly. And they don't want to do it as it is. So
exactly.
you know, so it's definitely but there's like I don't want to make it seem like there's no help available at all, because there is. It's just you have to be persistent in trying to get it, because there's some staff, some inmates, they'll try to discourage you from seeking it for whatever reason. So like you have to be persistent. You can't get discouraged, and because
even
you're going to be, yeah, but it's not like, I mean, no one's going to outright say whatever, but they just like, you antagonize someone in one way, that's going to carry over to the rest of their day.
Yeah.
And like, especially in like a maximum security, you're dealing with like guys who have been, you know, through some pretty rough situations in their life. So their go-to remedy for their stress or their anxiety or their aggression or whatever they're feeling is not going to be a request form.
Valid. Yes.
And the staff know that. I mean, they're professionals. They've been working there for years, usually for the most part. And not all of them do it by any means. There's staff that will try and help you. But unfortunately, it's the staff that are not trying to help you that usually have more impact just because of the way prison is.
Yeah, of course. It's like a bully. You know, 1,000 people say great things to you. The second someone comes along and says something hurtful, you don't remember those 1,000 things before.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's like everything is like security trumps everything on the inside. It doesn't matter. They can withhold your food from you if they can prove that there's a security threat. So, if you show any aggression in any type of way, let's say you did have therapy set up with whomever, you would think that would lead them to like kind of encourage you to get the therapy, but they're going to be like, no, you're showing signs of aggression. I mean, I guess which is fair. It is prison, so they're looking out for their fellow staff members in a way. But you
But I
know,
mean,
it's
there's
just
ways
like
to do it.
it's just this like cycle that goes
It is,
nowhere.
yeah.
You
I was gonna
know?
say it's counterproductive.
Yeah.
I'm sure you could find a way to do it where,
Yeah.
in between something on the phone, like
Yeah.
I know Zoom therapy sessions are super popular now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, it sounds like, there are these resources, but it's kind of a pain in the back to get them.
Yeah, definitely, for
Um,
sure.
which I mean, it's also like know your audience, I guess, in a way.
Yeah.
Um, for telling a person in prison for so many years to take initiative and fill out the form
Yeah.
over things that they might be dealing with, they might have had from their childhood for years, for how many years they're
Yeah.
it's not really I feel at least the best way to go about it. So, and
Yeah.
also back to the reading and writing thing, I know we talked about you would try to help some people read and write, and the education, some of it in there was very lacking. If you do want to share about the education you received while you were inside you had an outside resource, and if you want to share about some of the classes you took, and maybe because when we do talk about in a little bit about rehabilitation and stuff, I feel like education's huge. And if you
For
can't
sure.
write, or maybe don't understand kind of like basic maybe like high school information, we take civics and careers here,
Yeah.
just like the basic stuff, how maybe like detrimental that might be for your life as when your sentence is over and coming out. So
Yeah. I had a friend, a family friend that helped me get into a course at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax. And I was taking sociology. So basically, it was a year-long program called a transition year program, and it was for only Indigenous and or Black students could enroll. So I was doing great. I believe I had gotten to I did midterm exams, and I excelled on all four. But during this time, while I was in school, there was so the same person that helped me get into Mount St. Vincent, she is like a pretty significant community activist within.
this is a great segue. Perfect. I was gonna say this is perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, just keep on going.
Okay. So there was actually a public forum, which I believe is like a public debate type thing, I think. That was at a place called the Black Cultural Center in Halifax. And it was on like systemic racism within the federal prison system. And this family friend of mine was going to speak at this public forum. So she asked me to write a speech, which I did. So she dictated this speech to, I mean, there were wardens in the audience. There were, regular prison guards, probation officers, people from the community. Like it was a pretty diverse crowd. And she didn't say who had written the speech, but somehow, some way, as the weeks went by, and I was pretty scathing in terms of, my opinion on systemic racism and stuff like that.
I did read it. It's not
but I felt I was honest.
It was no, it is honest. It was
Yeah.
honest, but not in a way where I would have read it and been like, oh my.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't angry. It wasn't
sure.
it wasn't informational. There was no tone. I would
For
say there was
sure.
no tone interpreted, besides the fact that you were a young Black and Indigenous man
Mhm.
incarcerated.
Well,
Which
the
I mean,
reason I
how-
said skate, I use the word skating because I knew that's how like someone from the system would interpret it if they read it, you
okay,
know. So
fair
that,
enough.
and which, I mean, I feel like some of them probably heard it and just my face probably popped in their brain right away. But they
Fair.
somehow,
I mean, yeah.
yeah, they somehow confirmed down the road that I wrote this speech, and I was in Spring Hill Institution at the time, and this was after returning years later when I was, I spent the 200 days in segregation. I returned to Spring Hill years later,
Mhm.
and again, I was placed in administrative segregation for the same reason.
Oh,
My president.
they put you back where you were when you were there.
Yeah, put me back in administrative segregation.
Is
Sent
this
me
when,
back to Ontario. They sent me back to Ontario a second time.
is this when in the form there's the term Afro-Canadian used?
Yes, this is
Okay.
yes.
I don't
So
know if you want to bring that up a little bit, because I
yeah,
think
so
when we
basically,
talked, it was
so
just
yeah, no problem. So basically, once I was placed in non-disciplinary segregation, all of this like random source information started, which wasn't necessarily alleging anything specific. It would just say things like, this guy's really influential within the prison system, and he has too much pull. He has and like, I mean,
they really thought you were this celebrity from
exactly.
nowhere.
And like, to be fair, like I had especially at that point, once I had spent a little time inside, I had a pretty good relationship with like a lot of guys because
Mhm.
like I would help guys write stuff. I had my conflicts, don't get me wrong, but they were making it seem like, I don't know, like I was planning a mass escape or something.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like they were using terms like there would be like so anytime you're put into segregation or transferred or any official decisions that are made on your behalf are called assessment for decisions, A for Ds, they call them. So my assessment for decision on why I was in administrative segregation said things like, "Oh, I'm looked at as the leader of like the Afro Canadians," like, and they had this in quotations, not African Canadian, like Afro dash Canadians, or I was looked at as the leader of the blacks, and quote. And these are like staff that are writing these reports.
Yeah, it's
This is
supposed to
not,
be the intelligence team.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, and I obviously brought this like, so you have what are called like review boards. Every 30 days, you're in segregation. You go for a review board. And at my first review board, I brought all of this up. Um, I wrote some complaints, filed some grievances, and then I just ended up back in Ontario, like, not too long after that.
They didn't even want to.
No, no.
Well, I mean, how do you defend yourself there? That's a little, and I just, that to me, you told me that, and I think I actually like laughed, not in like it's funny, but it's just,
Yeah,
these are supposed to be educated officials,
yeah, for sure.
and they're just like, it's like blatant.
Yeah, it was like, yeah, and you kind of, not to change subjects, but you kind of asked
Yeah.
about schooling, and
Right.
I was just thinking that, like, and this is just like strictly opinion, of course, like, so majority of, or you could probably say all of the, inmates or prisoners, 2/3 at the very least probably struggled in school.
Yeah.
If they finished school at all, they probably,
Mhm.
or they could have dropped out. Like school probably wasn't like a high point in their life. So then, like, to me, to have like the exact same structure that didn't work while we were in the community, to have that exact same structure on the inside
Mhm.
Like, you could check a box and say that school's there, but are you really expecting this to work now? Like,
Yeah.
they didn't, for whatever reason, like they didn't take to that style of learning, or people learn in different ways, but just in terms of like the setup with like a teacher standing at the front, like school and prison is pretty much like, in terms of its setup, is pretty much like any other school in the community. And I
And
just
even
thought it
now,
was sorry.
even now, it doesn't. I am not a learner that can sit and listen. So totally understand. I'm in university now, and I've really
Yeah,
had to adapt because, like a 2-hour lecture is killer for me. Like I can't do it.
yeah,
So again, implementing these systems that are failing these people outside of prison,
yeah,
just because they have limited access to things to do doesn't mean they're gonna all of a sudden switch their brains.
yeah,
But like the way they adapt to things is not going to change. That's who they are.
yeah,
So
exactly.
I mean, you said you took sociology classes, so lots of system stuff going on, and the systems are very corrupt, obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
You of course would know. There's just a lot of, these things don't change, and people, it's like the definition of insanity, trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting something different. So
Uh,
I guess, yeah, it really should be a different approach to education in there. Um, I mean, if
you
someone
would
told
think
me
so, yeah.
you can go to a class and sit there for an hour and a half, I would have been like, I don't think so. I'm good. So
Yeah. And people probably think like, oh, you're already in jail doing nothing. Why don't you go to? But I mean, it's just like,
that's not
guys, just
that
yeah,
work.
it's just not gonna happen. It's not gonna work. It doesn't work. It hasn't been working. So, you know, at
Mhm.
this point, either your rehabilitation tactics aren't effective, or there are none at all.
That's what, and I mean, how are they really there if they're not working?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
um,
And I mean, like, it's definitely like, we're already criminals when we get there. Clearly, we don't make the best decisions. So it's like, it's not all like the system, because I mean, the system didn't necessarily bring us to prison. I
mhm.
mean, it's present throughout the steps that it takes to get you to prison, but ultimately it was your decision making in the very beginning that got you there. So when you couple that with, the authority figures not doing much to help and sometimes doing a lot to hurt, it's
Mhm.
just like, it's gonna take a lot to make it through and still have, somewhat of a positive outlook on, what you think life is and what it has to offer.
Yeah, so speaking of authority figures, there was and not doing much to help, we'll say. There was a incident that we actually have a video of.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if you want to just give a brief introduction to that of what happened, and then we can show the video.
Sure.
I'll give you the floor for that, and you tell me when, and I will put that up for us.
Um, yeah, so this was actually in Spring Hill Institution, the third time I was there, in 2021, I believe. Um, so there was basically an incident where, and the video doesn't show, it shows majority of it, but it doesn't show, like, there are other angles, that I didn't have, access to, but it doesn't show exactly like when the fight started. But basically, long story short, me and this guy, who was a lifer in the prison, had been having like a little bit of back and forth and conflict over, I don't know, the past couple of days or a week maybe. And so this all pretty much came to, explode, the night of the incident. Him and I kind of exchanged words in the weight pit. And I'll just say I wasn't the initial aggressor. And but I did end up like beating the guy up pretty bad. There wasn't any weapons involved or anything like that, but the severity of whether, I swung the first punch or not, just off of the severity of how bad I beat him up. Like there was no way I was getting sent anywhere else but to a higher security institution. Like that was inevitable. And but usually, from my experience up until that point, from things I was involved in or things I've seen, when there's like any incident going on, whether it's a fight or something involving weapons, both parties are usually removed from the institution and sent to a higher security level, especially the aggressor. But for whatever reason, after this incident, I was the only one. I was actually emergency transferred again the next day. I deserved it this time. To the same institution in New Brunswick, Atlantic Institution. And the other individual he was left in Spring Hill. He didn't, as far as I know, he definitely didn't receive a higher security level, which is really like, there's like minor punishments within like the institution, like to make you lock up early some days, or, you have to go 2 weeks of those purchasing canteen or something. But when it's like, physical altercations, it's usually transferred to a higher security. And I was the only one who received that punishment. I could speculate as to why, but what happened, I guess. And I actually, about 6 months later, I actually received the criminal charges from the police, assault charges actually, for this altercation, which, to my knowledge, that was the only time I heard of, guys being in a fist fight and somebody being like criminally charged. Maybe if I had sucker punched them but it wasn't anything like that.
There's
but
no
again, I got
permanent damage.
sorry.
There was no permanent damage or any, yeah.
Exactly. And again, I wasn't the aggressor, so like
Exactly.
it was just strange how they treated. But I'm sure my 2 previous experiences at this institution played into how they dealt with it.
Yeah, which again, not really fair. Not fair at all, actually. But all right, I will share the video. And again, feel free to comment and like let us know what's going on, because
Sure.
bear with me here. Trying to do the Zoom. All right. Okay, you can see that okay?
I can, yes.
Perfect. All right, here we go.
This is actually what they call the breezeway. So it's basically an outdoor like hallway to the gym. And this is like the weight pit. You'll see off to the left, the fight has already started, but it's still not on this camera anyway. And you can't see from this angle, but if you notice where like the group of guys are walking to, there's like literally 4 guards sitting right there. And the gym is like open concept. You can see everything. So
yeah. So it's almost like they were kind of letting it escalate.
Yeah, they definitely did.
Yeah, and then continued to punish you for it, which is interesting.
Like usually they would have already ran in, hit their emergency call.
Yeah. So even when nothing's going on, there's nothing.
And the fact that everyone just pretty much vacated the gym should have told them
enough. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're in their direct
they're
line
watching
of sight right now. Like we're right by their desk. And I think in a few seconds it switches over to the living unit that we lived on. That's him and I again.
Mhm.
That's his cell, obviously. Like, I definitely deserved, it's not like, I guess you could say I took it overboard a little, but I mean, this would
But
probably,
no one did anything to,
and you'll see not long after the two guards walk, you just saw it briefly.
yeah, the brief clip.
And they like looked right in his cell, they didn't say anything. And like, this would probably happen in most incidents if they didn't intervene.
That's what I mean. Like they could have come in to kind of trying to think of the word.
Yeah, I think that's the end of it.
Calmed it down a little bit,
Yeah.
And instead of doing that, they did nothing, and then kind of gave you slack for all of it. So
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that video, by the way.
Well,
Today was my first time seeing that as well, so it was
it's a
very
lot. I know it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot, but I think it needed to be seen and it needed to be showed. And we're very lucky that you're here today and be able to show us that.
For sure.
I don't know how much more time we have. For some
But
reason,
that kind of stuff happens every day, and honestly, usually there's weapons involved. Like, that might be like have a little bit of shock value, but like in those places, that's
I was
like,
gonna say it's you're not, again, not great place, not, I don't want to say not great people, because I don't think doing a bad thing makes you bad necessarily, but
I mean, but it is what it is. Like,
yeah, like
it's the school of hard
people who are
knocks for sure.
they're struggling, they have a little bit of stuff that they're dealing with, and I mean, to not be not give any conflict resolution, we'll say, or it's very disappointing, I think. Also concerning. There's also like just the safety aspect of it for anyone.
For sure.
I don't think you expect, you see a lot of stuff in media and Netflix shows or whatever, but I mean, it's happening to real people in real life, and the people that are supposed to be able to protect or keep things calm, we'll say, kind of lacking in there. I don't know if you want to talk about the other incident that happened as well. I don't know where you're at with that. If you would like to share, I'm sure people would enjoy to hear it. That is completely up to you. Just on the topic of officials and guards in these institutions. Did you want to talk about the other incident?
Sure, definitely.
Yeah.
This was actually probably like the last, major quote unquote incident that I had in my federal sentence. So, I mean, without going into why I think they did what I'm about to explain, that would just be speculation, really. So I'll just leave it at what happened. This was in Atlantic Institution, and if you notice, there's like a pattern with me and like.
I was gonna say, it's seeming that these things are happening in very similar places.
Yeah, I had a pretty smooth sailing in like Ontario and Quebec, but for whatever, the Atlantic region,
It doesn't. In just an observation, it doesn't seem like you're really the problem here.
Yeah, I definitely had my share of
well, obviously, but it doesn't.
Actions, but yeah. Oh, you mean in this particular situation?
Well, this one, very much so. But also, again, you said a pattern, and I can leave it at that. But
yeah, for sure. But yeah. So let's say 12 o'clock. I believe this was in 2020. This was 2021, I believe. I was sitting on my bed I believe I was watching TV and I had just finished, like I usually smudge every morning,
Mhm.
with like sage or bear root or like different things. And so I had my smudge bowl like sitting beside me on my bed, and my door is closed. It's a maximum security. So you're in your cell 22, 23 hours a day. Um, so every door has what they call a food slot. So basically, from the outside, the staff can unlock this slot, pull it down, and pass you food or different items, or a mop and a broom or something. So only officers can open your slot for one.
Mhm.
So slot comes down, the hand kind of like doesn't come right in the slot, but comes to the slot, and um, I get like what they call OC spray, or what some people know as pepper spray. They pepper spray me all on the side of my head. I'm sitting on my bed, my arm. So it basically hits the whole left side of my body. So I'm sitting, and the doors to my left, and my TV's like directly in front of me. I hear I believe it was three male, or not. I believe I know now that I saw the video footage in court, which I'll get to in a second. I heard them make a couple comments, like smart comments. They closed the slot and left. So their superior officer came around about an hour later, and because it just seemed like the way all the officers are acting, like nothing at it. Like it was like I thought I was like dreaming. I'm like, did that not just happen? Like, did
Yeah.
these guys? So he came around, I stopped him, and I asked him, like, why did they just OC spray me? He's telling me, he's like, oh, I don't know, which is, bull crap, because anytime that's called potential deadly force, depending on like what, like being locked in a cell and pepper spray, you could suffocate.
Yeah.
So anytime, any force is used at all, they have to write reports right away, so he knew.
Mhm.
So anyway, it basically, I was getting the runaround for like, a couple of days as to why they did it. So then I started to, I filed a few complaints, some grievances, and I filed what's called a habeas corpus with the provincial courthouse in New Brunswick. And a habeas corpus is basically an emergency application for the judge to give an order for them to stop whatever unjust actions you're accusing them of being engaged in.
Mhm.
So after like the paperwork started to go through like its steps, then I started to hear that, the reason they pepper sprayed you is because you threw an unknown liquid out of the slot, hit the officers in their faces. And anyone who has seen how the range or the inside of the institution looks, know that's just physics wise, it's impossible. And
Yeah.
not to mention, there's cameras pointing at every cell, and they claim that I did this without. So I would have had to have timed them opening my slot for whatever reason.
Yeah, you're really
Yeah,
talented.
exactly. And then somehow hit like 6'4" grown men in the face without sticking my arm on the slot. And so yeah, like I heard about this for a while, and then I was going back and forth with my parole officer, with the warden, like, and it really seemed like the only staff member that was trying to kind of like, well, I don't know what he was saying when he wasn't with me, but was the elder, the indigenous elder. He was like, obviously these guys were up to no good, and they're trying to, so I would say about 4 or 5 months after the incident, the RCMP showed up at Atlantic Institution and charged me with assault with a weapon on a peace officer times three counts of it, which are, you could get like several years in
It would have
especially
added a
someone
lot.
exactly like
Yeah.
had I been convicted of these charges, there's a good chance I would have never saw the light of day again because the court doesn't take lightly inmates assaulting officers, in which they shouldn't.
Yeah.
And given my history up until that point, it wouldn't have ended well for me.
Yeah.
So, which was crazy because none of this happened. And it wasn't like they had to take my word for it. There was video proof that what their officers were saying was false. Had it been, the video saved me because had it been just my word against theirs, I'd have been finished.
Yeah.
And so long story short, had to go through, you know, all the court proceedings. We get to trial. And for whatever reason, the prosecutor doesn't introduce the video as part of her case, which makes no sense. This should be like,
Mhm.
this should be your case, should be the video.
Mhm.
So my defense lawyer introduced it. Once the judge saw the video, and you know, like, I'm thankful that I didn't have a judge that was in on these shenanigans, which might sound like, you know, a little crazy for someone, but this stuff happens. It happens all the time. And but once this particular judge saw this video, he stopped the trial, cleared the courtroom, and like he was not happy.
Mhm.
He threw the charges on that same day,
Mhm.
and he made it clear that you know, they were liable civilly for what they did to me. And he's basically like, you guys could do the, like, the officers that fabricated those stories could be brought up on charge. Like, that's illegal. You can't just falsify government documents. And yeah, he wasn't
A lot
happy.
happened that should not have happened.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like for it to get to the point where I had to go to trial and get a judge to throw, there's a lot of blind eyes that were turned.
Yeah.
And, you know, way beyond, and I mean, this is just opinion, but those officers who are pretty much at like the bottom of the food chain in terms of their profession would not have went forward and done all of that. Like aside from them pepper spraying me, like in terms of the charges with like a head nod from a superior, like they're just not gonna. I just can't see that happening. So for whatever reason, like there was this big effort to basically throw me under the bus, and so yeah, we have a. You know, I won't get into too much detail, but there is definitely, you know, the judge's remarks about civil litigation were definitely, you know, accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. The same reaction I have right now is the same reaction I had when you told me. It's still does again. Very unfortunately, you're very lucky. And I say that as in a way that, you know, it shouldn't be up to luck. These
for sure.
happen. Like, and also for the prosecutor to not even put that as evidence and not, you know, introduce that is should have been the first red flag. Again, it does leave me a little bit speechless. I'm very sorry.
And honestly, my family was like an integral part of, you know, that working out, because like when it came to like any prison stuff or anything I was involved in the streets, like I didn't, because I knew they weren't hearing, they didn't want anything to do with it. But when this happened and I sent the video to my mother and then I told her like what they were alleging, like they were not having it. They're like, we're not gonna uphold you in wrongdoing, but we're not just gonna let like these guys just throw you to the wolves for no reason.
Exactly.
And so, you know, their support was vital in terms of how that turned out, because you know, they drove to New Brunswick, came to court, and so that was a big part of it for sure.
It must feel also kind of relieving, maybe, to have some validation there that, I don't know, was it relieving to have that validation? I feel like if that
for sure
something like that happened to me and I'm kind of alone in it, dealing with it, and someone was to say to me, absolutely not, I
For
would
sure.
be like, whoa, thanks.
For sure. And like, imagine that happens. I have no family support. I don't know how to read and write. Like,
Mhm,
that's not going to turn out well for me, probably.
mhm.
And if that kind of stuff happens more than people think, and it gets just swept under the rug because guys don't really have any resources or anyone to ask for help.
Mhm.
And it's like, yeah, it's crazy. It's unfortunate, actually.
It is. And yeah, you can't just be ignorant or naive and say it only happened to you.
Yeah,
There's thousands,
yeah, for
thousands
sure.
and thousands of people in these places. So we can only, statistically speaking,
Yeah,
I don't think it's a
it's
1 in
probably
1
safe to
million.
bet I'm not the only one. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
I hope that other people out there have resources. And if anyone listening, if you know somebody who is currently incarcerated or in the system and you feel comfortable, be a support, because it does sound like at the end of the day, having a good support system,
it matters. Yeah,
yeah, it really and like, just if you can, and if any of you know anyone, just be a outlet, be a support, because from what I'm gathering here, yeah, it's huge,
yeah,
just with everything, mental health, you know uh legal matters, that, like,
sure. It matters.
validation, it's huge, in and out of the system. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Just before we wrap things up, I do have a few questions of my own. Um, of so something like, what's something I think that you, looking back on your experience now, what's something that you would want to see the biggest change in the system be? That's my
Um,
question. But
no, that's fine. I feel like if there was more transparency in terms of, because I feel like a lot of things are nitpicked and like fed to, whoever the audience is. So I feel like if there was more transparency, independent, um, transparency in terms of who oversees, because for the most part, I don't believe that CSC, the organization that runs the federal prison, like they're contracted by the government, but it's just a contract. I don't believe they answer to anyone. And most of the avenues that they have for like grievances are just answered by someone else in another wing of their organization. So I feel like transparency would probably change a lot.
I think so too.
Yeah,
I agree. Even our two brief conversations, um, I've done some digging and I've talked to a few people, and even a few people I've spoken to, just about, the CSC as well. Had no idea. So,
yeah,
and there were a lot of conversations of, I don't want to support that. I don't want money going to that. I don't
yeah,
want. So, the more people, the better.
yeah,
And
for sure.
so on my end, thank you, because
Thank you.
you have completely changed a view on something that I already thought I knew a bit about, but I mean, deeper, and just from the conversation and the information you told me, it's reached other people. So I do,
Yeah,
the work we're doing here right now is important, and thank you so much for sharing your
sure,
story. And I just think, yeah, very important things to talk about, just to know about,
for sure. Who
you know,
knows where this is gonna lead?
exactly. Information
Yeah,
is, knowledge is power.
for
And
sure.
the more people that know, the changes could be made. It's the first
Yeah.
step, right? So,
I want to say
really,
thank you because you definitely made it comfortable and made it like it wasn't awkward or I didn't feel weird at all. So, you
God, I'm so
definitely,
glad. I'm so glad. Also,
yeah,
anyone listening, this is my first thing, my first project with Keep Six, so I'm looking forward to more. Matthew, hopefully we can meet again sometime and do some more
For sure.
stuff. I hope
For
to
sure.
keep you in the loop here. Yeah, thank you guys all so much for watching. Big shout out to Matthew. Thank you so much. Matthew,
you.
anything else you want people to know or take away from this?
No, I mean, I just hopefully, the questions and the answers speak for themselves, and people will have hopefully whatever their genuine reaction is. Hopefully, it's something positive.
I agree. Well, thank you guys so much for listening, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Sounds good.